The moment Catherine Waverley saw the young woman's necklace, her entire world came to a standstill. One moment, she was lifting her wine glass. The next, she was staring, dumbstruck, at the gold pendant nestled just below Jada's collarbone, an exquisite pendant in the shape of a crescent moon, etched with a single letter, L. "Mom, Dad," Chase called, cutting into Catherine's conversation with another guest. Catherine turned. Her son, Chase, stood there, a young woman by his side. He held her hand, a little awkwardly, but his eyes shone with pride. She had a cascade of curly hair and a radiant smile, dressed in a simple yet flattering gown. "This is Jada," Chase said, a tremor of nerves in his voice. "The one I've been telling you about." Robert was the first to react. He stepped forward, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Jada, it's a pleasure. I'm Robert. Chase has told us so much about you all wonderful things." He extended his hand, and Jada took it graciously. "It's so nice to finally meet you both," Jada said, her voice warm and genuine. Catherine smiled the polite, practiced smile she'd worn to 100 such galas. She glided forward, her eyes sweeping over Jada from head to toe. "Hello, Jada. You look lovely." She reached out, intending to take the young woman's arm in a welcoming gesture, and that's when she saw it. The moment Catherine Waverley saw the young woman's necklace, her entire world came to a standstill. The smile on Catherine's face froze. Her hand, poised to touch Jada's arm, stopped dead in midair. "Mom, are you all right?" Chase asked, his voice laced with concern, noticing his mother's abrupt shift. Jada watched her too, her own smile faltering with confusion. Catherine blinked, trying to pull herself from the tide of memories rushing back. She set her wine glass down on a nearby table, her hand trembling slightly. She didn't look at Jada or Chase. Instead, her gaze fixed on an empty space just beyond them. I'm feeling a bit faint," she said, her voice flat, unnaturally cold. "Excuse me, everyone. I need to go inside and rest for a moment." Without waiting for a reply, Catherine turned and retreated into the house, leaving behind Chase's stunned silence, Jada's bewilderment, and the questioning gaze of her husband, Robert. She moved past the guests, offering mechanical nods without truly seeing them. Each step up the grand staircase felt heavy, weighted. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It couldn't be. It was just a coincidence. She slammed the bedroom door shut, the dry click of the lock severing her completely from the party below. She leaned her back against the door, taking a deep, shuddering breath to steady herself. After a moment, she went to the large, wooden armoire. She opened the bottom drawer where she kept her seldom-used things. Beneath layers of silk scarves, she pulled out a small wooden jewelry box, old and unremarkable. Her fingers trembled as she undid the latch. There it lay, resting on a bed of faded black velvet, a gold pendant in the shape of a crescent moon. She picked it up, feeling the familiar, cool weight of the metal in her palm. She brought it closer, her eyes tracing the exquisitely carved L. In her mind, the image of it superimposed itself over the necklace on Jada's throat. They were a matching pair. The coincidence she had desperately hoped was a figment of her imagination had now hardened into an undeniable truth. Catherine staggered back, sinking onto the edge of the bed. The pendant in her hand felt both as heavy as a stone and as searing as a brand. The past she had spent nearly 20 years burying had just clawed its way back to the surface. Catherine sat on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. The twin locket lay cold in its old box. She didn't know how long she'd been there, 5 minutes or half an hour. But the muffled sounds of the gala drifting up from downstairs reminded her that she couldn't hide in here forever. She carefully placed the locket back in its box, tucked it away in the drawer, burying it once more. She stood and walked to the mirror, smoothing her hair and adjusting her gown. She took a deep breath and composed herself, donning the calm, cool facade of a hostess accustomed to concealing her emotions. It was her perfect mask. As she descended the staircase, Her gaze immediately scanned the area for her son. She found Chase, Robert, and Jada standing in a quiet corner of the veranda, away from the main throng. They seemed to be in the middle of a serious conversation. Robert had a hand on Chase's shoulder, while Jada was looking down at her hands, her expression somber. Catherine drew closer, just enough to be within earshot, but hidden from their view. "Really?" Robert asked, his voice full of surprise, yet gentle. "I had no idea you were adopted." Jada looked up, offering a sad smile. "Yes, it's not something I bring up often. My adoptive parents, they were wealthy, but..." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "They were very controlling. Everything I did, from the school I attended to the friends I made, had to be on their terms." Chase gave Jada's hand a gentle squeeze, his eyes full of encouragement. Robert nodded with understanding. He noticed that while she spoke, Jada had unconsciously reached up to touch the pendant at her throat. He smiled warmly, trying to ease the tension. "That's a beautiful necklace," he commented, his tone light and casual. "It's very unique." His compliment seemed to put Jada at ease. She instinctively glanced down, her fingers brushing against the crescent moon. "Oh, thank you. It was a gift from my adoptive mother for my 16th birthday. It was probably the only thing she ever gave me that didn't come with strings attached. I guess that's why it's so special to me." Catherine stood, concealed by the shadows of the doorway, every word from Jada landing like a hammer blow to her chest. Her adoptive mother, a gift? Her mind reeled. Where did that woman get the necklace? Just then, Catherine stepped into the light. "What's this serious conversation I seem to be interrupting?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. All three of them started, turning to face her. "Mom," Chase exhaled in relief. "Are you feeling better?" "I'm fine," Catherine replied curtly, but her eyes weren't on Chase. They were locked on Jada, or more precisely, on the necklace she wore. "Jada, may I ask you something about your adoptive family?" The blunt and sudden question made the atmosphere heavy. Jada looked a little taken aback, but she nodded politely. "Of course. Is something wrong?" Chase frowned at his mother. "Mom, maybe now isn't the time." Catherine held up a hand, a small but absolute gesture, silencing him. She never took her eyes off Jada. "I'm just curious. Your adoptive parents, did they ever tell you how they came to adopt you?" Jada was clearly uncomfortable, but she answered nonetheless. "They did. They said they found me through an agency. I was left on the steps of a church as a newborn." Catherine felt her chest tighten. "Left behind? With anything?" she asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Jada nodded, her hand going to her throat once more. "Yes, the only thing I was left with was this necklace." She glanced down at it with an innocent fondness, completely oblivious to the hurricane brewing in the eyes of the woman standing before her. "My adoptive mother said she'd kept it safe for me and gave it to me when she thought I was old enough to understand," Jada explained. "She said it was my only connection to my past, to my birth mother, that she was just its keeper, holding on to it for me." Catherine's breath hitched in her throat. She reached out, bracing herself against a nearby chair to stay upright. The truth was so raw it made the world spin. "Mom, you're really not well," Chase said, his voice thick with worry. He moved to support her, but Catherine brushed his hand away. The elegant hostess was gone. In her place was a woman driven by a raw, desperate need for confirmation. "Your file," Catherine said, her voice trembling but resolute, her eyes locked on Jada. "Your adoption papers. I need to see them." Jada took a step back, completely thrown by the bizarre demand. "What? Why?" "You're scaring her, Mom," Chase snapped, stepping between Jada and his mother as a protective barrier. "What is this all about?" "Move, Chase," Catherine nearly shouted, but then reined it in, her voice becoming a plea. "Please, Jada, it's incredibly important. I'm begging you." Looking into Catherine's eyes, Jada saw something beyond mere curiosity. She saw pain, desperation, and a fragile flicker of hope. Though she couldn't comprehend what was happening, she felt the sheer gravity of the moment. I have a scanned copy on my phone," Jada stammered. Her hands shaking, she pulled out her phone and opened a secured file. Both Chase and Robert held their breath, watching over her shoulder as she handed the small screen to Catherine. Catherine practically snatched the phone. Her fingers flew across the screen. She scanned the dates, the locations, the names of the adoptive parents. And then she froze at a note at the bottom of the first page. Social worker's note. Infant found wrapped in a worn blanket on the steps of St. James Church. No identification. The only accompanying item was a gold necklace with a crescent moon pendant, engraved with the letter L. The phone slipped from Catherine's numb fingers, landing silently on the soft lawn. She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears, seeing Jada not as her son's girlfriend, but as someone else entirely. A choked sob escaped her throat. "Catherine," Robert whispered, stepping forward to place a hand on his wife's shoulder. "That necklace," Catherine said, her voice cracking. "It's mine." Chase was stunned. "What do you mean it's yours?" "It's just a similar one, right?" Catherine shook her head, tears now streaming down her cheeks. She looked from Jada to Robert and back to Jada. "No, it's not just similar, it has a twin." She brought a hand to her own chest, as if she could feel the other necklace still lying in its box upstairs. "When I was 20, she began, each word pulled from a deep, ancient wound. "I was young, foolish, and I had nothing. I gave my daughter up." The entire garden seemed to fall silent. Chase's mouth hung open, words failing him. Jada stood rooted to the spot, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I thought she would have a better life without me," Catherine continued through her sobs. "The only thing I could leave with her was one of two necklaces, one for me and one for her." She looked directly at Jada, her gaze filled with the weight of nearly 20 years of regret. "The necklace you are wearing is the one I left for my daughter." Catherine's confession hung in the still night air, heavy and irrevocable. For Jada, the world didn't just come to a standstill, it shattered. Catherine's words were a thunderclap, leaving a deafening ring in their wake, utterly incomprehensible. She stumbled back a step, her arms falling limp to her sides. The necklace at her throat, her most precious keepsake, suddenly felt scorching hot, as if it were branding her skin. "No." Jada shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "That's impossible. What are you saying?" Her eyes, wild with confusion, darted from Catherine to Chase, pleading for a lifeline, for some sign that this was all a terrible mistake. But Chase was frozen, his face drained of color as he looked from his mother to the woman he loved. His own world was tilting on its axis. Jada raised a trembling hand to the crescent moon. Everything she had ever believed about herself, her origins, the meaning of this one treasured object, it all evaporated in an instant. She wasn't a nameless foundling who had been discovered. She was a daughter who had been abandoned, and the woman who had abandoned her was standing right in front of her. Pain, confusion, and a vague, sickening sense of betrayal began to rise within her. Seeing his wife trembling with emotion and Jada on the verge of collapse, Robert finally broke the silence. He stepped forward, putting a steadying arm around Catherine's shoulders, but his gaze was on Chase and Jada. His voice was low and firm, an anchor in the swirling chaos. "I know this is impossible to believe." He looked at his son, then at Jada, with profound empathy. "Chase, Jada, it's true." Chase rounded on his father, his eyes sharp with accusation. You knew. How long have you known?" Robert took a deep breath, not shying away from his son's gaze. "Your mother told me 2 years after we were married. It was a burden she had carried alone for far too long, and I believed she needed someone to share it with." He gave his wife's shoulders a gentle squeeze. "Catherine has lived with that decision every single day. I promised her I would never bring it up unless she chose to. I kept that promise. Robert's words didn't lessen the shock, but they offered a sliver of context, a thread of reason in a situation that felt insane. It framed the secret, not as one born of deceit, but of a deep sorrow, guarded in silence. But for Jada, that changed nothing. Her entire life story had just been rewritten, and she didn't know where to begin. I have to go, Jada said, her voice raw. It was the first full sentence she'd managed to get out since the revelation. She couldn't stay there a second longer. She needed space, needed to be alone to try and piece together the fragments of her mind. Jada, wait, Catherine pleaded, stepping toward her. Jada flinched back instinctively, holding up a hand. Please, don't, she begged. I just can't. Her gaze swept past Catherine, past Robert, and finally landed on Chase. In his eyes, she saw a confusion and pain that mirrored her own. Without another word, Jada turned and practically fled the house, disappearing into the night. Chase went after her immediately. Jada, let me take you home. The entire car ride was silent. The quiet was heavier, more suffocating than any argument could have been. When the car stopped in front of Jada's apartment, she turned to him, her eyes hollow. I don't know what to believe anymore, Chase, she whispered. A story, a necklace. How can I possibly just believe it? Chase looked her in the eyes, his own heart aching for her. You don't have to, he said firmly. You don't have to believe anything just because they said it. You deserve the truth, your truth. The next morning, Chase showed up at Jada's door. She looked exhausted, worn down from a sleepless night. Hey, she said quietly, starting to close the door. Wait, Jada, Chase said, holding it open. I know you need space, but I have something for you. He looked at her, his expression serious. You were right last night. A story and a necklace aren't enough. You need proof. Undeniable proof. Jada said nothing, waiting. I called a private lab, Chase explained. They're completely discreet. They can schedule an appointment to collect samples as early as today or whenever you're ready. Everything will be private and confidential. The results will be sent directly to you. Jada stared at Chase, surprised by his decisive action. This isn't for my mother, he continued, as if reading her thoughts. And it isn't for me, it's for you, so you can have your own answer, uninfluenced by anyone else. He took a step back, giving her space. It's your call, Jada. All I did was clear a path. Whether or not you want to walk, it is entirely up to you. And no matter what the results say, I'll be here. Jada looked at the sincerity in his eyes. His offer wasn't pressure, it was empowerment. For the first time since last night, she felt a sliver of control over her own life. She nodded, a single, decisive gesture. Okay, I'll do it. A week later, an email with the simple subject line, "Your test results," landed in Jada's inbox. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She took a deep breath and clicked it open. There was no lengthy preamble, just numbers and a single, cold, clinical conclusion. Jada stared at the screen. There were no tears, no screams, just a heavy silence that settled over her. The biggest question mark of her life had just been replaced by a period. It was true. The first thing she did was call Chase. "It's true," she said, her voice unnaturally flat. On the other end of the line, Chase was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do now?" he asked, his own voice tight with concern. Jada looked out her window. I need to talk to her." Chase found his mother in her study. Catherine was sitting motionless by the window, staring out at the garden but seeing nothing. For days, she had been a ghost in her own home, consumed by waiting and dread. "Mom," Chase said softly. Catherine started, whirling around. "Is there news?" she asked, her voice urgent. "Jada got the results," Chase said, getting straight to the point. "It's true." Catherine closed her eyes as a single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. So, it was final. How is she? She needs time, but She wants to see you." Catherine's heart skipped a beat, then began to race. A chaotic storm of emotions churned inside her. Hope, fear, both. What would she say? How could she possibly explain a decision she'd made 20 years ago? As Chase left her alone with the news, Catherine's mind reeled. It didn't go to the distant past, to the foolish 20-year-old girl. No, her mind flew back to the fateful night of the party. She remembered the moment she saw the necklace. Her first reaction hadn't been the joy of a mother finding her lost child. It hadn't been curiosity. It had been panic, the stark terror of her secret being exposed. She had been cold. She had walked away. She had interrogated Jada as if she were a threat, not her own flesh and blood. And then, a painful truth crashed down on Catherine, one heavier than the guilt she'd carried for 2 decades. She had failed her daughter not once, but twice. The first time, as a young, desperate girl, she had physically abandoned her. She'd told herself it was for the best, that she was giving her daughter a chance at a better life. But the second time, right here, in her own home, as a successful woman who had everything, she had abandoned her all over again. This time, it was emotional. She had looked at her daughter and seen only her own shame. She had let fear suffocate her maternal instinct. Catherine stood and walked to the armoire drawer. She didn't just owe Jada an explanation for the past. She owed her an apology for the present. She pulled out the small, old wooden box. She had to show Jada that no matter how wrong her actions had been, a part of her had never, ever stopped thinking of her. Catherine called Jada. "Jada," she began, her voice hesitant but warm. "Your father and I are having a small get-together this weekend. Not a big gala like last time, just a few close friends. I was hoping, I want to introduce you to them, the right way." And so, that evening, the lights in the Waverley's garden were on once more. But the atmosphere was entirely different. Instead of formal and distant, the space was filled with genuine warmth. There were only a dozen or so people, the true friends who had witnessed the Waverley family through all their highs and lows. Catherine stood in the center of the living room, Robert by her side, his arm wrapped supportively around her waist. She cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention. The smile she wore was no longer a perfect mask. It was radiant, shining from within. "Thank you all for coming," she began simply. "Tonight, I'm not introducing a business partner or a social acquaintance. I want to introduce you all to a member of our family." She turned, looking at Jada, who stood beside Chase, with an expression of pure affection. "This is Jada, my daughter." A stunned silence fell over the room, only to be broken moments later by warm, heartfelt applause and knowing smiles. Afterward, Chase stepped forward. He looked at Jada, then at his mother. He took a breath and smiled. "Life is a funny thing," he said, and a few people chuckled softly. "A few months ago, I brought Jada here to introduce her as my girlfriend." He paused, his gaze deepening. "And now, I stand here, welcoming her as family." He looked directly at Jada, his voice steady and sincere. "Jada is not my sister by birth. Our relationship is more complicated than that. But I know one thing for certain. I am so proud to have her in my life, and I will always be here for her. She is my family." Chase's words were the final, necessary validation, a declaration not just for Jada, but for his mother's past as well. It was a choice, to build a new kind of family from the broken pieces of the old. Later, after the guests had departed, Jada stood alone on the veranda, looking up at the night sky. Catherine came to stand beside her in silence. No words were exchanged, but the quiet between them was, for the first time, peaceful. Beneath the moonlight, the 2 pendants on Jada's neck caught the light. She now wore both necklaces, one resting just above the other, nested together as if they were always meant to be a pair. One, a symbol of the past she could not change, the blood tie that gave her life. The other, a symbol of the present and the future, the forgiveness and acceptance she had chosen. They weren't just jewelry, they were her story. And in that moment, they all understood that the strongest bonds aren't the ones we are born into, but the ones we choose to fight for.